Everybody Hates Rand is a Wheel of Time podcast that will contain spoilers for all 14 books. So if you're anti-spoiler, stop this, read all 14 books, and come back. We'll be here, waiting.
Our title is a joke and is meant to be taken as such. Everybody in this context refers to us and our cats. You are free to feel however you want about Rand. He's a fictional character. Please don't DM us.
The world is a mess, Dark One stretching out his hand. The dragon's reborn, the fire's been fanned, but everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand.
This is Everybody Hates Rand, your friendly neighborhood Wheel of Time podcast. I'm Emily Jushaw.
And I'm Sally Gidger.
And I'm super annoyed by these chapters, so I just don't wanna be here very long.
Yeah.
In this space. In this Perrin-shaped hole in the wall.
Hole in the
like
universe.
A cartoon, yeah.
Yeah, I just read Grendel by John Gardner. Would not recommend. That is not an EHR approved text. But there is like this scene where he talks to the dragon that Beowulf also kills eventually, you know?
Sure.
And he it's described as him falling out of space and time to sort of fall into the dragon's lair, basically. And that's how what I feel like happened to me with Perrin. I just sort of fell out of space and time into this horrific place.
This dingy murder hole.
Which is really unfortunate because some really interesting things are happening in this chapter, and Perrin is just instead I will torture people and collaborate with the invading imperialist fascist regime.
Yeah, we're really at the I'd like to say it's the low point, but the thing with Perrin is that he just sort of keeps compounding his crimes.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to say. It's like when people say, ironically, considering the Try Guys, how do you, committing adultery isn't just one decision. It's a series of decisions that you continue making because at any point in the process you can back out.
Yeah, of course.
You'll still have done something wrong, but,
yeah,
there are degrees of
absolutely
wrongness. And it's like Perrin makes this decision, multiple decisions, but then he continues to make the decisions.
No, that is such a good point, Emily, about oftentimes in fantasy in particular, I feel like it operates very much in the idea that good and evil are binaries. This comes very much, fantasy comes very much out of the fairy tale tradition and the folktale tradition, where actually maybe if you go back to the original fairy tales and folktales, good and evil and morality is a much more slippery thing. But in the way they've sort of been Disney-fied and Brothers Grimm-ified to a certain extent, good and evil does become a little bit more binary, and fantasy comes out of that tradition. You think, of course, last week we talked about fantasy progenitor J.R.R. Tolkien and the way that he impacts the genre. Anyway, I'm on my rambly little soapbox today. I'll try to keep that contained. But we get in fantasy often this idea that good is very much one thing and evil is very much another. And of course that is not true. And fantasy fails this test within the text. The text will fail its own test of being these are our good guys and these are our bad guys, and there's no real in between. And somehow I keep talking about this, but somehow it's no matter what our good guys do, they never slip out of the camp of being good guys. And it's just that is not the case. That's not how things work. Perrin in this instance is very much if you take the perspective of one of the people in Perrin's camp, how do you not look at Perrin and be this is a small dictator who is absolutely not caring about what is happening, is sort of creating this microcosm of evil inside this camp. And it's just so frustrating for it to be oh, it's fine that Perrin chops off a man's hand, takes food from a village that is obviously really struggling, and offers no assistance. chooses to collaborate with the Shanshan, chooses to sell slaves to the Shanshan. Like you said, it just like, it's this compounding thing, and it's never like, oh, time for Perrin to face a consequence or something.
Anyway, I don't think there's any way forward except into the crevasse.
Yeah, sorry. Again, I will try and ramble not so much today.
This is a tri-chapter experience, a 3-dimensional wave of terror. The first chapter in the Homeric tradition is, and we get a lot of these with Perrin, is just this sort of catalog of who is in Perrin's camp. It's quite annoying because, I mean...
It really is like reading the Iliad.
Yeah, you're just like, okay, great, I get it. Bereline's still here, Arganda's still here, the fucking Aes Sedai are still here. But we get them preparing to go to this town that they learned about in Perrin's last point of view that would presumably have grain and other necessities to sell to them. Perrin is being accompanied by Bereline, a contingent of Mainers, and also contingent of Gialdanin, not significantly Arganda, Alejandro's captain of the guard, because he's staying behind. Perrin says it's because Arganda doesn't want to get any farther from Alejandra. Perrin, on his high horse, is like, yeah, I'm ready to die for Fail, but Arganda just seems like he's ready to die. And I'm like, how do you think you look to people?
Yeah, bestie, have a modicum of self-awareness.
Yeah, it's like, these are two men who are not handling the situation well at all, but they're both like, well, the other guy's being terrible. Anyway, they're also being accompanied by the Aes Sedai. Neald is opening the gateway for them, and they've got some Two Rivers guys to, actually load the carts with anything they buy. Aram significantly is staying behind because Aram has been
radicalized.
Yeah, he's sure getting worse. He's getting more touchy, more violent, and ultimately Perrin no longer trusts him to be by his side in delicate situations. Similarly to Arganda, we know with the benefit of hindsight that this is because Aram is probably spending more time with Massima.
Aram is basically like the werewolf chained to the radiator.
That was a good Teen Wolf pull.
Yeah. Perrin's just like, it's for your own good.
Perrin himself doesn't even want to leave because he's like, the maidens might come back with some captives that they got from Malden or whatever. And it's like, okay, whatever. He's like, and I'm just so excited to torture them for information. He doesn't say that. Perrin isn't thinking about what will happen when he has prisoners to interrogate. As with most people, he's just sort of like, and then everything will be fixed.
They'll tell me what I need to know.
Yeah, their agency is not a facet of this conversation at all.
Yeah, Perrin is very much living in the eternal present. It's just sort of like the next decision. It's pretty insufferable to read.
Yeah. Everyone's pretty, decked out. They had to break into their safes, more or less, to get enough money. And Bereline's like, yeah, we're all wearing jewels so that they know that we mean business and that we can afford all of this. Anyway, they travel. Neald is, of course, the shining light of these chapters. He's just such a funny little guy.
I know.
With his waxed mustachios.
I know. Perrin is so rude to him, which I think is very homophobic.
He better not fuck up, Neald. And I'm like, let him live.
Yeah, can you make
not fuck
teleportations? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. He's like, very well, at least he has some showmanship.
Yeah.
Which is pretty hilarious when you think of Grady just being like,
this bored farmer, and Neald's like, it's me! It's Val and Luca 2.0.
If Neald and Val and Luca met, it would be like a black hole.
Yeah, they can't occupy the same space.
Yeah, it would be like two stars colliding.
Time.
They travel to this town. Perrin immediately is like, oh, no wonder Massima didn't loot this town. They actually have walls.
Yeah.
That's not exactly Massima's cup of tea. But as they advance, they see there are people on the wall, and Perrin's nose/sixth sense starts giving him bad vibes.
Yeah.
Especially because they walk up, and the people on the wall are like, how do we know you're alive? And Sayanid iconically says, if I have to prove I'm alive, you'll regret it.
she's fun in these chapters.
Yeah, she is pretty funny. And they're like, oh, okay. And open the gates, everyone goes in. Balwer, who's also there with a couple of fails, little weirdos, immediately slithers away into the darkness to collect information. They talk to the guys on the wall, who Berelane's like, where's your lord and lady? That's who we're here to talk to. And this guy's like, y'all want to talk to the grain merchants, and they're all at this pub.
Yeah.
So they start heading there. So Harbor is a town that Perrin describes as being very smelly, very dirty, and everyone being shifty. Mm-hmm. Not in the criminal sense, but in the sort of shell-shocked, traumatized sense.
Right.
Although I do think it is very interesting that Robert Jordan has categorized dirtiness and bad hygiene in this off-putting sense.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, people who are dirty aren't bad people.
Yeah, I was, preparing for this episode, and I was, desperately trying to figure out, why is everybody dirty? Spoiler alert, we haven't gotten to the big reveal yet, but, the dead are walking in So Harbor, and it's that's really upsetting, but, why do we need to indicate such an upsetting setting? With this type of, dirtiness and this type of, mass depression that is making people, unwilling to...
Yeah, and we're never given a clear answer in the text, which I think is what makes it troubling.
Yeah.
It would be one thing if Robert Jordan was and everyone was afraid to be in a shower by themselves, because that's where the ghosts are.
Yeah, or
the shower ghosts.
There's something with the water, too. The food is contaminated.
Yeah.
Is the water also gross,
Yeah, something like that.
Just very confusing.
But instead, what we're left to believe is that these people are, like you said, depressed, these people are terrified, and they are slipping away from humanity.
Yeah.
And dirtiness equals inhumanity, which is a real, fun bias.
Yeah,
to be carrying into any world, fantasy or otherwise. That's my one quibble with the So Harbor sequence. Otherwise, I think it's a very interesting sequence and a really fun examination of the bubbles of evil effect.
Yeah, I agree.
They go to this inn where the grain merchants are. They're also very shifty. Everyone's acting super weird. As Berelane, conducts this negotiation, Perrin, getting more and more skeeved out, is okay, we want to see your grain storehouses. And everyone's like, ugh.
Oh, no.
One guy, puts his head on the table, as though,
yeah.
Buddy, you're just giving away the game there.
He didn't even try.
I know. He was just oh. The guy who's in charge of the, Gialdanin isn't Argonda. It's, his second in command, and he's just carrying, a full wine goblet this entire time. Which I just think is really funny. Doop-a-doop-a-doo.
Wine mom.
Being generally unpleasant. They go to the grain houses, open them up. Perrin gets into the grain and immediately finds, unsurprising to us, perhaps because we've been in Egg's point of view recently, this is everything's gone bad.
Yeah.
Everything's rotting. In this case, for grain, it's that there are weevils. So Perrin and Berelane are oh, great, so you were just super trying to cheat us. And Berelane's yeah, for half the price, we'll take it, but we're going to have to sift it significantly. It's interesting because Perrin and Rand and Matt, their groups generally don't have to deal with the amount of food corruption that, say, the Aes Sedai and other groups of people who are not affiliated with the Ta'veren do. Because, they just sort of create these bubbles of anti-Dark Ones effects.
Yeah.
Which just sort of left me curious. I was once they, get them into the camp, are we going to find that everything's good again?
Yeah.
More or less?
Very, how does this immunity that they have work?
Who knows? But while they're in the grain houses, they hear that guy, not Argonda, the other guy, Wine Mom, yelling, and they go out there, and he's like, oh my god, I just saw someone, walk through a wall. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, you saw a ghost. there's just dead people everywhere. And, of course, the lord of the town fled because he was seeing his dead wife, who it is implied he murdered.
Yeah.
So, sort of along the, like, dirtiness thing. So Harbor's lord was a murderer, perhaps. These merchants are trying to cheat people.
Yeah.
And, yeah, just generally, like, not good behavior. So it's almost like So Harbor deserves this, which I think is an interesting stance to take because, you know, it's a bubble of evil. We should be seeing that it's not on any morality scale. It's just sort of happening to people.
Yeah.
But they start sifting the grain. Neald is like, one of us has to, like, stay here and see if we can do anything for these people. And Perrin's like, no, fuck off. Neald's like, great, thanks. Super duper, you're the best. Fuck you.
It also is just like, again, I know Perrin is dealing with so much stuff, but as soon as I was like, because in the lead up to it, when they're like, how do we know you're alive? You're like, oh, wouldn't it be so funny if there were ghosts in Wheel of Time? You know? Yeah. You're like, ha ha ha, Robert Jordan's gonna pull a fast one on me. There won't be ghosts. And then you get there and you're like, holy shit, there are ghosts.
There's ghosts!
Wheel of Time suddenly just has ghosts. And we start to see more of this with Matt also seeing ghosts, you know? And you're like, what the fuck? This is such a wild turn. This is so fascinating and interesting. And Perrin, who's as our like viewpoint and main character is supposed to be kind of like our window into the world, does not express any curiosity or interest in this at all. And you're like, what the fuck just happened?
He's just like, oh, well.
And then we just like pick up and leave So Harbor, never to return. And it's like, Robert, I would read an entire book series about this town. Like, this is super interesting. And he's like, look at this set piece I have crafted.
Yeah, it's
goodbye.
Goodbye, and we'll never go back.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, you're right. From, like, a series, because, like, from a series standpoint, there have been hints leading up to this, like, in Elaine's point of view in this book. Yeah. I think there was, like, a maid who screamed because she thought she saw a dead person.
Right.
And that's been happening every once in a while to other people, but never to, like, our point of view characters.
Right.
Given Perrin still hasn't seen a dead person, I think Matt is probably the first person to actually start interacting with ghosts.
Right.
But, like,
what a freak.
Perrin's being told to his face that this is, like, not just one person seeing ghosts, this is an entire town, and the evidence is before him. So he's just kind of like, oh, well, on with my business, you know, pobody's nerfect.
Yeah.
Leaves So Harbor. You're right, it's very odd.
It's just, like, so frustrating to me. Like, why would you do this to me, Robert? It feels so egregious. And, like, I can't put my finger on it exactly, except for, like, the idea that dirty people are evil and people who have poor hygiene somehow deserve bad things to happen to them. Like, something about this sequence feels, like, really upsetting. Like, again, just in a way, like, can't quite put my finger on it. Like, I feel like those two qualifiers do not totally make up for, like, how upset I am about Robert Jordan's treatment of So Harbor. And again, I don't know what it is. So for him to just be like, look at this somehow offensive thing I've plopped in the middle of here, but it's also very interesting. Like, what, like, it could be less offensive if you let me just sort of, like, explore what's going on here. But Perrin just doesn't care.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're just stuck with a character who refuses to engage with any side quests.
Right.
And I'm like, no, side quests are what make the story good.
Yeah, they're what make things fun and interesting. And also, like, it's just very indicative of Perrin's point of view right now, where, like, the literal end of the world, or possible end of the world, is happening around Perrin, and he refuses to acknowledge it.
Yeah, like, we are not allowed, in Perrin's perspective, to have any fun, any deviations from what is, you know, right in front of him. Like you said, he's very much in the present. Yeah,
he's just, like, very single-minded. He's got a goal. He exists in the present. He is not doing any planning. He's not doing any reflection. It's just, like, there are ghosts in So Harbor.
And on we go, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I'm curious about how this would play for another character, because being in Perrin's head right now is a deeply unpleasant experience. And it's not just, like, his litany of people. I mean, Rand also has a litany of people. Who doesn't at this point? But, like, you know, Perrin's just no fun to be with at the moment. And So Harbor, I think, is also written very much to be an unpleasant experience. Like, it is off-putting. It is... None of the people we meet are kind or interesting or funny. They're all just mean and traumatized. Da-da-da-da-da. It's just kind of gross. Nobody feels comfortable around things that smell or are dirty.
Yeah.
However much Robert Jordan is moralizing about it. So it's just, like, very much intended to be a experience.
Yeah.
But, like, sort of Perrin himself is sort of an experience at the moment, so it's compounding.
Yeah, and I think maybe a little bit of what is upsetting to me is this kind of theme in Wheel of Time, and theme in, like, any type of text that deals with war, because the last battle is framed as a battle. It's not like we are just having a climate apocalypse, you know, something that you can't fight. It's very much presented as we are going to fight the forces of evil and somebody is going to come out victorious. Like, that's how the apocalypse is presented to us. So, of course, like, a war is happening between the forces of good and evil. And, like, here you have a perfect example of just, like, everyday people caught in the middle. And Robert Jordan is just like, well, maybe they should have been rich or something. I don't know.
Yeah, the only people worth following are the ones who just incidentally got caught up in Matt or Rand or Perrin's circles.
Yeah, and it's just like, here's... These people are, like, legitimately suffering. If all the food is spoiled and Perrin and Berelain are buying basically, like, the remainders of their stores, what is going to happen to these people? You know, it's just like this big unanswered question that just sits so poorly with me. And Perrin just, like you said, Perrin is just, ugh, and so every decision he makes just kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. Speaking of bad decisions, when they were walking to So Harbor, they saw, like, a Shanshan pterodactyl above them. That's what it is. And everyone was like, "Ooh, Shanshan," and Perrin was like, "Nothing to do with us," which is, you know, sort of in a single sentence the whole problem with the Perrin's attitude.
Yeah.
And in a more intentional writer, I might think, oh, you know, Robert Jordan is showing us that, like, this is a bad thing that Perrin is saying, like, that Perrin is representing people generally who are like, if it's on the other side of the world or far enough removed for me, then it's not my problem.
Yeah, I think a really interesting thing with Perrin is that very infrequently do we get what's happening in Perrin's story from somebody else's points of view.
Yeah.
Like, so frequently with, like, Rand, it'll be, like, Cadswan is narrating, or Min is narrating, or even Loyal sometimes. And with Matt, you mainly get Tuon at this point, but up before this, you know, Egg and Nynaeve, we were seeing him through other people's points of view. Through Egg, we get all these Aes Sedai. Nynaeve, it's also with Rand, so we see her through somebody's different points of view. Elaine. It's like we're getting a more balanced perspective, but, like, with Perrin, we usually get Fail as kind of the only other one, but they've been separated. So, like, I think a lot of this is, like, a problem of perspective. Like, we are in Perrin's head. Mm-hmm. And that has, like, the narrative effect of being like, this is a miserable place to be. So, like, if that was the intention, well done. But it's also, like, there's nobody providing any, like, balance for me to understand whether this was, like, the point. Like, if we were getting Grady and Neald being like,
yo, Perrin's fucking crazy.
Yeah, like, if we were getting somebody to just be like, here is an external perspective on events, I'd be like, oh, perhaps I can think of this in a more intellectual way than just being like, dear God.
This sucks. Yeah, that's a really good point. They leave So Harbor. Well, I don't even know if they all leave So Harbor. I think some people stay to
they have,
supervise,
like,
the sifting of the grain.
6 warehouses to sift through, and Perrin's like, again, not my problem.
Yeah, and Berelain's like, oh, well, this is going to take days or whatever, but Perrin's just like, oh, well, off we go. He gets a report from one of Balwer's people, who is, like, the least sneaky and the least subtle, so much so that Neald, also the least subtle person in the world, is like, oh my god, he's so bad at this. Which is embarrassing for that guy.
Yeah.
All he says is like, yeah, Balwer's not gonna be back soon, but go ahead without him. And Perrin's like, yeah, fuck, I'm leaving. So he leaves accompanied by Berlane, the Aes Sedai, most of the main people. They go back to the camp. Perrin comes up to the camp and he's reported to by his main Two Rivers guy, who's like, yeah, some prisoners were brought back. Massima's here. And they're over by the tent, and we're like, what's this gonna be? Perrin walks up. There's, I believe, 5 Shadow prisoners, most of whom are just hogtied, awaiting torture. And one guy is in the process of being tortured by some creep who we saw in Path of Daggers, like, literally collecting ears.
Oh, yeah.
So Perrin's like, oh, great. Like, Perrin, just kill this guy.
Just kill Massimo.
Not to be, like, punitive justice over, but, like, I agree. With Massima and some of these guys, just kill them.
Yeah, I mean, Wheel of Time is not giving us exactly, like, fertile ground for, like, anything but punitive justice.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like there are therapists in Wheel of Time who could be like, could you unpack for me why you are collecting human ears?
What led you to this? Hey, ear guy? Hey, ear guy. What's with the ears?
What's with the ears? Perhaps we can draw out our feeling. This
And
is
he
not to
can be
mock
like-
therapy.
No,
Yeah,
I know.
Therapy is very important, and this is like a legitimate point that there are actually no societal structures that would support anything but killing this guy.
This guy's never going to be like, well, actually, it turns out that ear collection goes back to my childhood trauma.
Yeah.
My mean dad or something like that.
Yeah, and now it's time for me to make amends and move forward.
No, he's just like, just going to keep doing my ear collections.
And Perrin, again, is just like,
Well, there's nothing we can do to stop this man collecting ears.
there's simply nothing that I can do about any of this. Except stop this torture only to start it up 30 seconds later.
Your guy's gonna get the ears. Yeah, arrayed at this torture sequence are our 3 main boys who are on the scale from evil to morally gray.
Yeah.
Massima, who is clearly motivated by racism, and in fact is citing real-world racist rhetoric that white people had towards black people in America, as well as toward Native Americans, which, as we recall, the Ale are frequently coded that way. Massima sounds like a 19th century frontiersman who's about to slaughter an entire village. Saying that, like, they don't feel pain like we normally do. He's just faking his pain. Blah, 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 blah. Arganda's standing there saying, don't you fucking want to get your wife back? Clearly you don't want her that much if you're not willing to go through with this. And Aram's standing there like, this is just what we have to do, Perrin. Like, if you can't handle it, then I'll do it. Don't get your hands dirty. I'm here to dirty them for you. So it's interesting. It's an interesting reversal of the normal triad, which is 3 women.
Right.
Instead, what we're getting here is 3 men who are representing this very, like, hear no evil, see no evil, something. They're, like, all shoulder devils.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point, Emily. Usually you have this chorus of 3 women offering different points of view, but it's 3 of the worst men offering the same point of view with, like, varying degrees.
Yeah, they're just literally offering 3 different, like, rationales or excuse methods to get Perrin past this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some crossroad demons for you.
Yeah. What Perrin does here is irredeemable. Well, that depends, I suppose, on how you review redemptive justice. What Perrin does here is very bad.
Yeah.
He cuts off a man's hand and tells him, I'm going to keep cutting off your limbs and these other guys' limbs unless you can all provide the same story and answer my questions. Mm-hmm. This is, on some level, a modern-day police tactic, separating people into different rooms, making sure their stories match up, threatening them, blah, 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 blah. The actual limb-cutting off thing is much more medieval, we hope, but as we all know, places like Guantanamo Bay exist.
Yes.
So there is no shortage of real-world torture in the world. Unfortunately, the focus of this scene is the fact that it's very traumatic for Perrin.
Yeah.
It's sort of presented in this way where, like, he's almost having, like, flashbacks while these guys are just, like, saying all these horrendous things to him. It's almost like, you know, in a TV show, all of these, like, we'd see all these flashing callbacks, and we'd see, like, you know, the, like, joke about, like, dead wife in a movie where it always pans back to her and she's, like, in lovely lighting, wearing a white dress, like, laughing. And it's like, you know, that we're seeing montages of Fail at their wedding or whatever.
Yeah.
So this is all just like, look at what Perrin's doing because he has no other choice and he's so upset, and this is this climactic sequence for him. But Perrin goes through with it, again, compounding evil. It's not something like he cuts off this dude's hand and then is like, what the fuck? Which I don't know if that would make it better, but, you know, he's there and he, like, carries through long enough to issue his threats and be like, this is the tactic we are going to use. And then he takes off to have his little breakdown.
Yeah, leaving basically the instructions to continue.
Yes.
More or less. And, like, yeah, I'm so fascinated by what you were saying, and you're just, like, so smart. This idea of, like, there are basically Perrin is coming up against, like, threshold against threshold, cliff against cliff, at which any point you can turn around. And he's just refusing to do so. Like, there are so many, like, he could have just been like, no, we're not going to do this. Could have not cut off anybody's hand. He could not have issued threats. He could not be like, yeah, continue in my absence because of X, Y, and Z, you know? Sorry, I'm just repeating what you're saying because I'm so fascinated by this framework that you're presenting. It's so smart and such, like, a good look at what Perrin is doing.
I'm also interested by the fact that, like, torture is never not the primary option.
Yeah.
We're sort of given this, like, framework of, like, Perrin does this really bad thing, and what's worse is that Perrin himself does it. He doesn't delegate it. You know, that's the absolute worst end of this spectrum.
Yeah.
Which is what we get. On the better end of this spectrum, Perrin lets the maidens torture these guys.
Yeah.
Because they assure Perrin that they will do it correctly and probably faster than everyone else.
Yeah.
Because they're Ale, and they know how they'll operate in torture scenarios. Da-da-da-da-da. But it's never like, Perrin's like, let's capture prisoners, question them, treat them well, and then, you know, there are prisoners now. We'll see if perhaps that becomes some sort of advantage later on, or perhaps by treating them well, they will change their minds, or perhaps we will be able to deprogram them.
Yeah, it's just like, I find it hard to believe that your spy master Balwar is untrained in sort of interrogation and manipulation, you know?
Yeah.
How do you think he gets information out of everybody he knows?
Yeah, this is just sort of, like, presented, like a lot of what we're seeing with Perrin, and we've alluded to this before, as an insurmountable problem.
Yeah.
There's only one way forward, and it is the worst possible way.
Yeah, this is such a good segue into, of course, the end of these chapters where Tallanvor returns. Apparently he's been gone this whole time.
Yeah, who fucking knew? It's not like I missed him.
Yeah, I was like, he hasn't just been here? Yeah. Where is he coming back from?
Speaking of the worst men you know.
Yeah.
It's so sad. You were saying there's no one, we don't ever go to anyone's point of view in Parents, and I was sitting there trying desperately to think of whose point of view I would want to go in, who's not as grotesque an experience as Perrin.
Yeah, like,
and
truly.
It's just Grady and Neald.
Yeah, Grady and Neald are the only options, and apparently Robert Jordan just, like, refused to give the Ashaman points of view for some reason, which is something until Brandon Sanderson was like, we will have Andrew.
Yeah, he gave Eben right before Eben was fridged.
Oh, poor Eben. Fridged for the cause. We should maybe come back to Perrin's sort of meltdown in the forest for a second, but jumping in terms of themes, Tallanvor comes back and he's like, yo, there's a bunch of Shanshan with a bunch of these Daman who could potentially... They're also hunting the Shadow for kind of confusing reasons.
Reasons unknown.
And maybe we could partner up with them. And I think Balwar is there who's like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. This is a horrible idea. And Perrin is just like, tell me about the Shanshan. You know, his sort of famous last words.
Oh, seriously. Well, the enemy of my enemy.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah.
And like Emily said, we've alluded to this so much that, like, Perrin is like, fails capture and the sort of, like, massive horde of the Shadow. Maybe Balwar isn't telling them not to do it. I don't quite remember.
I'm wondering, because my reading was that he was like, yeah. Tallanvor.
don't
Go
quite
on. But I'm
remember.
looking at it, and Balwer gives us zero indication of where he
interesting.
falls on this.
Interesting.
Which
how
is
we
sort
both
of classic for Balwer.
Yeah. Interesting how we both sort of projected
Yeah, what we
him.
wanted from Balwer.
Like, what would be the most interesting thing for him to do? No, that's interesting. I apologize for my misread. But as we've alluded to, like, so many times, so this might be a little bit repetitive, Robert Jordan, master of this universe, was like, this is an insurmountable problem. There is no way for Perrin to get failed back except for collaborating with the Showmanship. And therefore, what the narrative is telling us is that we should ultimately be grateful that forces like this exist because they are so powerful that they can solve any problem. It's very like military propaganda, like, isn't it so good that the United States has such an insanely jacked military in order to solve problems around the world? And it's like, obviously, historically, we know the United States military has never solved any problem.
Just causing them.
It's perhaps exacerbating problems all across the globe. So we're just like, set up with this idea that there's only one way to go, and it's the right decision. And it's the same with the torture sequence. Like, Perrin has, like, it's I refer to them as crossroad demons as kind of a joke, but Perrin is just sort of like, it doesn't make sense actually to call it a crossroads because there is no other way for him to go.
Yeah, they're just like a single road, and these three guys are like the hitchhiking ghosts in the haunted mansion. You know?
We're like, we have to go this way. And it's just like, and therefore the narrative also ultimately holds up that this is the right thing to do. And like, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit extreme there, but it's like, if the author is not giving us any other decisions, like, that's taking a stance, you know?
Yeah, there's no alternatives then.
That's how I think anyway. Like, I think Robert Jordan is offering up that there are no alternatives in these scenarios, that violence is justified when you are facing such insurmountable odds. And it's just like, that is a really icky place to be.
Mm-hmm. One more thing.
Yeah.
Before we get to Perrin and Elias's anticlimactic talk, I would say. Perrin, what he threatens the Ale with is not just the removal of their limbs, but that he will leave them in a town to beg.
Right.
As though to say, being disabled is the worst possible punishment.
Yes.
Being helpless. So, just some light ableism from Robert Jordan.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Perrin storms off into the woods and, like, throws his axe at a tree. Elias appears and is like, well, I told you to throw that away if you start liking it, so did you like it? And Perrin's like, no, like, that was terrible. I always think of this, like, scene as way longer than it is and way more emotionally impactful, but it's really not. It's like they exchange, like, 3 sentences. Perrin is like, it's more that I, like, could see the possibility of one day enjoying it because I don't like how I react to violence.
Yeah.
I feel so, like, you know, turned on, not in a sexual sense, but in a, like, adrenaline is pumping through me sense. Violence is a drug. It's adrenaline.
Yeah, totally.
And Elias just says, like, well, you know, everyone reacts really differently to combat situations and to violence. Some people go, like, really cold, and some people go hot. Yeah. You know, what you're describing sounds like a, pretty typical response.
Yeah.
And Perrin's just like, well, no one has ever suffered like I have. And then Neald shows up to be like, Balwer's back.
Yeah, like, Perrin has this very bad case of, like, not understanding. I got this phrase off the podcast Query, which is very good. It's from Cameron Esposito's interview with one of Tegan and Sarah. I can't remember which one it was. I apologize to twins everywhere for this mishap. And I think she quotes it from something else, but the idea is, like, you are not terminally unique, you know? Mm-hmm. And, like, Perrin is very much having a teenager response to this where it's like, no, I am unique. Nobody in the world is like me at all. I'm the only one who suffered. I'm the only one who's experienced this. And what Elias is offering is ultimately the comfort of the fact that you are not terminally unique. Like, there are other people who have dealt with this, myself included, and perhaps we can, like, work through this in some ways that might be productive, like helping you process this with other people, or maybe talking to other people about it and getting their perspective. And Perrin is just like, absolutely not.
Yeah, like, Elias is not trying to be like, oh, well, You're not special, get over yourself.
Yeah.
What he's trying to be like, I mean, although that is true, Perrin. What Elias is trying to be like is, like, listen, adrenaline's a hell of a drug.
Yeah.
And, 98% of the guys who have this experience that you've described don't end up as serial killers.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry so much about it. But again, Perrin is sort of interrupted before this conversation can reach any sort of conclusion or climax.
Right.
So we're left on this sort of like, coitus interruptus in terms of this conversation. Which is frustrating because, of course, what we want is for Perrin to just fucking make a decision.
Yeah.
And that's the problem because all of Perrin's decisions in this section are bad, but they all feel like they aren't final.
Yes.
I don't know how to describe that except that we, the readers, are very obviously like, Perrin's making bad decisions, but we all know that Perrin is like one of the 3 main characters, so he's not going to be making bad decisions forever. This is just a low point, and he will soon have a redemptive arc of some sort. So they don't feel final to us.
Yeah. I would argue, and I know I have a really major bias here, so I'll admit that. I will say they don't feel final until Perrin agrees to meet with the Shawnshin. For me, that is kind of... And maybe even at that point, he could still back out, So maybe it's when they, like, seal the deal and spit in their hands or whatever. Maybe that's kind of the final moment for me. But it's just, like... I agree, it is really frustrating. I feel like with the ghosts, we've been building up to this conversation between Perrin and Elias since literally book 1. We are now on, book 10? Why do I always forget? Oh, it's because we skipped Path of Daggers and I have no idea how to count. And so it's like, why would you interrupt this conversation? Just to, like, leave Perrin in this limbo if he can make... And you know what? You're so right. I do have this bias of feeling like Perrin is irredeemable because he worked with the Shawnshin, but I do still feel like narratively throughout that we are kind of led to believe that this is not a final decision, that once Perrin gets failed back, he will snap back to reality and then be like, oh my god, what have I done? I've not gotten to that point with him yet, so cannot speak to that, but you're so right that it never feels final. And so it's like Robert Jordan just is just like continuing to play in this space, which is really uncomfortable because it allows a lot of really bad things to happen.
Yeah, we just feel really suspended in this moment. And it's uncomfortable to be suspended for, 4 whole books? On a question that can be resolved pretty easily.
Yeah, and, I'm trying to remove my, very obvious anti-Perrin, anti-the Shawnshin bias here. To be like, it is kind of interesting, I guess, to explore moral quandaries in the face of war or whatever. Like, how do we navigate an ultimately violent world? But I just, it just doesn't work for me. I just don't feel like I'm getting any value out of this limbo, out of this suspension.
Well, I'll say with the advantage of hindsight that there is no advantage toward it because I don't believe Perrin's interactions with the Shawnshin specifically are ever treated like the bad thing that they are.
Yeah.
So I'm in agreement with you, but narratively, I don't think Robert Jordan understands what the fuck's going on, which is pretty par for the course.
It is also just not to beat dead horses to death over and over and over again, but it is another instance where the length of this series is a detriment. You're dragging out, I know, again, we've said this before, but it is, notorious among people who read Wheel of Time to be, the rescuing fail sequence is absurdly long. But it is absurdly long. And, none of this, maybe it would work if it was condensed a little bit. Perrin agonizing over violence for 100 pages, not 10 books.
Yeah, it almost makes me think that this later series, up to a certain point, should have just been splitting characters. Entire book on Perrin, an entire book on Matt.
Yeah, take the Two Towers approach.
Yeah, because, Jesus Christ, we can't, the problem is that it's so extended. I think if we were seeing all of Perrin's points of view all at once, we'd still have this slog, but, it would be a single book.
Yeah.
So that's my big, bright idea.
No, I think that's really smart. I think the joke there is who would read an entire book from parents' point of view.
Jesus Christ, seriously.
But, like, it could be really interesting. At that point, perhaps you would see the sort of intellectual narrative project playing out here in a way that would feel satisfying rather than being like, we have been doing this for so fucking long and it feels like all of our other characters are making some type of forward progress and Perrin is here just slogging along in the snow, same type of shit over and over and over and over and over again. It makes me feel bananas. Here we're ending with Tallanvor coming out of the fucking forest, like some sort of bog monster.
He's got a beard now.
Yeah,
That's how we always know that a man's been on an emotional journey. He grows a beard. Women always cut their hair shoulder length, and men are like...
beard. I truly have no idea where this clown has been. If he's just been, like, wandering around the forest looking for Morgaz by himself, I have no fucking idea.
It's just been doing.
But we end with him. What a fucking low note. Sorry these chapters were such a bummer, but...
Yeah, but that's it for Perrin and Crossroads of Twilight. But thanks everyone for listening. Thanks to Glenn and Mackenzie for our theme song. Thanks to our patrons on Patreon and our followers on social media.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to give an extra special shout out to our patrons. I know we've been kind of slow on responding to comments. That's on me. It just has been a really rough and busy time. So thank you for commenting. We do see them and we love them, and I will respond to you with as much affection as you deserve soon. So thank you for engaging with our content. We're really glad that you enjoy it, and we're really, really grateful for your support, and we'll attempt to return in kind more quickly.
Do you have a sign off?
Let's see.
Well, I opened the door today to let in my mother, and she had a giant Amazon box, which was confusing because she was dropping by to drop off something for me.
Right.
And I was like, what's it? And she was like, oh, it's on your doorstep. So we go upstairs, I open it, and it is a, like, set of knives. Just like kitchen knives. And I was like, hello? And Sally was like, oh, there's an explanation. And then I dig in the box and there's a note from my sister that says, this isn't a threat.
Or is it?
Or is it? It was just a birthday present, but it was pretty funny feeling like we were being threatened in the most roundabout and expensive way possible.
Somehow we're giving you a weapon, and that's the threat.
That's the threat.
As if I'm giving you knives to bring to my gunfight.
Real does sound like my sister.
Power move.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.